That's the motto, and that is it for us today, and we'll leave you with it. I can't do it. We'll do it live. We'll do it live! Fuck it! Do it live! I'll write it, and we'll do it live! Fucking thing sucks! In 5, 4, 3...
Happy Monday, and welcome back to the Wolff Den, presented by Win Again Academy. I'm Matt Wolff, founder and CEO of Ticket Time Machine. Today we have a very special guest, Kathryn Bertine, with us. Kathryn, welcome to the show. Happy Monday. How are you?
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me on the show. It's good to be here. I'm glad we were able to connect through Win Again Academy. That was really cool.
That's how we met, and Mark Moyer doing great things with his networking and informational events. We're going to get to speak to you a little bit more in depth than you were on there, but check out winagainacademy.com. I believe they have another event tomorrow night, which should be pretty good based on NIL. For those in the audience who don't know who you are, and we're going to get to all of it, and then tell us who you are, just real quick.
So I wear a few different hats, but I guess you could say that I most identify with being an author, an athlete, and an activist. I'm now retired from the professional cycling ranks, but I had the good fortune of racing on the World Tour circuit for 5 years. And then I stemmed off into activism to try to make the sport a little bit better. And along the journey, I've been a writer for years. So that's a little bit about who I am.
Yeah, that's a good start. And I read the book. We'll start there and then we'll go backwards. It's called Stand. And it's a really great book that hits on a lot of things. We're going to try and not give any spoilers away to anyone, because I encourage everyone to buy it and read it. It touches on a whole lot of topics, many that are really close to my heart, which is always great to see. And if you read the book, you'll understand why we did that intro for Kathryn, but we don't want to spoil anything with that. So let's start with how did you become a writer?
Well, yeah, you know what, Matt, I even love to say, even before we came on the air here, you readily admitted, you're like, look, I'm not a big reader, but like this book spoke to me. And for me, like that's why I write. And it's comments like that, like yours, that really affect me greatly. And, kind of prove the point that all books are a unique journey. And sometimes there are some out there that really will connect with someone. So thank you for, taking that path and being willing to take a chance and sit down and read. It means a lot to me.
Well, I thought, look, you've done some great things. You've been in press all over the world, on TV, in the newspaper. You've written books. So for you to take your time to come on my show, which I know it's, this is the thing in the book. I'm not a nobody, but my show is not well known. It's not it's not watched by a ton of people. So for you to take your time to come on this show, I really appreciate that. And, wanted to, if I have to read a book, I think it's good. It's better. I'm better equipped for what I'm trying to do and what I do than I was before I started the book. And, it's good to, I don't know if you're a trailblazer in some respects, but you're kind of just, took what people did and really ran with it in a way. Is that a fair to say?
It's very fair to say that. And I think that's really the most important part, is the fact that I'm not famous. I'm not an Olympic gold medalist. I'm not a wealthy influencer, and the fact that I was able to create and affect change by kind of going with the flow of picking up where other people had left off, or maybe, stepped into the arena, so to speak, where that opportunity was presented. And that proves that we can all do this. You don't have to be, a super celebrity to make shit happen.
Yeah, but on the flip side of that, you were a writer for ESPN.
Yeah, correct.
With perks and privileges and access that the average person doesn't have. So it's funny, as I read the story, and without giving away too much of the book, a big theme is not feeling your worth. And I don't know if it's a self-esteem thing, which is a little bit, it's a part of, you know, all the shit that happened in your life, which stuff like that happened to anyone would be enough to give doubts in their mind. But it's still, you had a leg up for someone, let's say like me, who wants to change the world and go do this. I've had a lot of trouble trying to, you know, advance what I'm trying to champion for. But I'm going to push through it and I'll get there. I think having someone you on a show like this is going to help. We've had other people on the show with incredible stories about, you know, some people who are well known and really made it big, Olympic athletes, and some people who no one's ever heard of. And I don't think that your story's better just because you won a gold medal.
Right.
And so that's, you know, but talk about the, you know, when did the doubt and self, you know, the second guessing, was that a story your whole life that you had to struggle with? Because you were a collegiate athlete, which is, you know, that's a one percenter.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, honestly, the doubt and the self-worth came much later. I think a lot of athletes know that when you're engaged in a sport, that is something that can give you the tools of confidence and, you know, the ability to kind of leverage yourself to an equal playing field, so to speak. And for me, that was a great gift. You know, I love my rise through sports. In college, I was a rower. I have my little rowing mug here from the head of the Charles. I was a rower, and I didn't find cycling until I was in grad school. And in between that, there was triathlon before I got to road cycling. So I had a later career stage in sports. But growing up, I played a whole bunch of sports. I was just exposed to a lot as a kid in a really good way, you know, playing softball and track and field and, you know, running and figure skating. I lived near a rink, you know, and my parents were happy to be like, look, here are all these choices of sports. And I just wanted to explore all of them. So in those years, the early years, yeah, I was very well aware of my level of potential or not potential in sport. And that was great. But I would say that the self-doubt started much later. You know, it was really not until I became an activist or, you know, or that I was fighting for rights, for women's rights in sport, that it was that industry that attempted to make me feel less than. And, you know, and other people's views and kind of that societal norm. You know, I didn't really experience any of that until my mid-20s or so. Even so, my first book that came out, that was in 2003. And even on the grounds of authorhood, you know, I felt like, okay, I'm worth something. A publishing company invested in me. This is great. And then after that book, ESPN got on board, and I wrote for ESPN for 2 years as a columnist. And then later, I worked as a senior editor and again as a columnist for ESPN. And there I did feel my worth, but behind the scenes, there was some stuff happening where, you know, I thought the direction of sports coverage should go this way. And there were people at ESPN who wanted it to go that way. And I think that's a very important distinction, that it's not like the whole company was, you know, at arms against my views, but sometimes the people who are decision makers, you know, if they don't see that they're not eye to eye with you on certain matters, those are the people that can not only block the path for me, but block the path for progress. And that was really the first indication I had that, you know, this is a little bit off. And the value, not necessarily at first my value of self-worth, but the value of others and of women. I was like, this isn't cool. This isn't right. We need to expose this.
Yeah, and they're tied together, the, you know, stopping progress and stopping you, because there's so many people, and I used to be one of these people where I hit that roadblock and that's it. I'm lazy. It's too hard, and we stop. And so imagine if you did that, right? Because of this person or that person. One of the great things I love about, you know, owning my own company is I'm making all the decisions. And so right or wrong, my ideas have a lot more value than they did any of the 20 years that I was in corporate. And I had so many good ideas that were just, look, that's not the way we do things. And I think you posted something about that, or it's okay. Well, the way you do things sucks and it needs to be changed. And that's one of the things that I champion for now. I consider myself a unicorn disruptor. One of the things that I, really I believe in with your book was just telling the truth. Be yourself and tell the truth, and don't try. There's no need to hide who you are. And I've never really done that, but I've had, and I was, when I was at work, I was a pain in the ass because, you are a pain in the ass if you're trying to invoke change, but I'm doing it for what I believed was right. And I'm never afraid to talk about and support and be vocal about what I think is right. And some people are a gray area, but what puts us on the right side of history? Like, how is there actually another side to this? And maybe for you, it's like the Tour de France. Like, how is there an argument against women being in the Tour de France? Right? I mean, right. I don't understand that.
Yeah, I'm so glad that doesn't make sense, because it shouldn't, a big part of Stan for those who are new and listening in is the fact that women did not have equal access to the Tour de France. And we had to clarify this a little bit. It's not like women wanted to race against the men. We wanted to race, to have a women's race in addition to the men's race, right? Kind of like we see in marathon, we see in tennis, we see in skiing, we see in all the sports. There are very, very high levels of sport in this modern day and age, and cycling is one of them. And even though you don't see it as much on TV in the US, worldwide, it's actually quite a global sport, and it has a huge following. And the ability of women at the World Tour professional level is very, very high. It's not like they're riding around in petticoats and bonnets. Like, we've evolved, and it's super exciting. And if you're a fan of the sport, you don't care if you're watching the ponytails or the non-ponytails. Like, it's a very exciting sport. So the fact that Tour de France did not have a women's field was just preposterous. That would be like saying women can't play at Wimbledon. Women can't go to the Olympics. Women can't run the Boston Marathon. So we're like, oh, what the fuck? Like, this is not cool.
If I was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and the question was, hey, who won the women's Tour de France in 1999? And there were three guesses and then three names of popular racers, and the fourth one was women didn't have a race. There's no way in hell I would have picked the fourth one. It never even occurred to me. I just said to my friend, like, what do you mean women didn't race in the Tour de France? Of course they did. But it's crazy to think.
No, that's exactly it. You actually bring up a really good point, and I call this, in the book, this is the loophole of progress, is that we assume that it's 2021, everybody's equal, duh, and the reality is, when we pull back the layers, is that's not true at all. And the Tour de France is one of those many examples. And the reason that they did not receive any pushback for so many years is because the general public assumed that there is a women's field and that all is right in the world. And, then I came along, and, first 2009, but I didn't really gain traction until 2012, poking the bear. And that's when we had a lot more visibility on social media too, Twitter, Facebook. They were kind of up and running and doing well. And that's finally what really flipped the switch for us to gain extreme traction in 2013 through change.org, saying, like, look, this is wrong. It's not right. We want to fix it. But now we have a global platform for people to chime in and say, yeah, this is nuts. What do you mean there's no women at the Tour de France, right? So that loophole of progress, we always got to kind of keep aware of what's happening and what's not happening. And sometimes it takes a little work to look at what's not out there, the Tour de France. And the big thing too with this is that it really has nothing to do with bicycles. It has to do with the fact that there's a section of the world that isn't equal. And if we can fix this, then what we hope is that other inequities can look at our example and say, hey, we made change happen here. So let's follow that same line and make change happen here and here and here. And it's really more about society than it ever is about sport or bike racing.
Yeah, two things come to mind is we don't know what we don't know, right? And the second thing is just because there's not something doesn't mean there's not demand for something. So you
Right.
can't say there's no demand for it because there isn't one. And if we had it, then we could find the demand. And even if you have the first one and it's not a roaring success, it still doesn't mean that it's not, because you want to get to the levels. Everything has to have a progress. Very few things that start out new are going right, to the top and are ultimately popular for everything.
Yeah, that's exactly where decision making, the power of making decisions, is what's most key. Because we, not just in women's cycling, but in all women's sports, we see this, that the common refrain is, oh, well, there's no demand for this. And the reality is that demand is created by the media putting it out there for people to see, and building, a little bit of a package around it, saying, hey, check this out, watch this. The marketing and the media is so key. So it's not fair for somebody to say, oh, there's no demand, that's why there's no Tour de France. It's like, oh no, it's the opposite. There used to be a women's race in the 80s and the Tour de France cut it, just scrapped it, rather than offering the broadcast rights to cover the entire thing and invest in it equally. So, that's the first, thing that we always have to fight is, it's out there. There is a demand for it. It's just kept undercover because nobody is the one who's in charge, or those who are in charge of actually lifting the cover off of this. They're the ones that have to speak up and make that change happen. It's all those decision-making positions, like you alluded to before. Working for another company or working for yourself, you get to make your own decisions. And then when we fight for change, we have to go to the powers that be in other companies and say, hey, you're missing something. If you do this, not only is it right for society, but guess what? You're also going to increase your ROI and your bottom line will double.
And sometimes it's a timing thing. Timing is so important in life, but in business too, because there were elections in, we want to talk about your journey and stuff like that without giving away too much of the book, because I think not knowing some of this stuff is really going to improve your experience of reading the book. But a lot of what you've encountered is, hey, this person was in charge and it wasn't going to happen until they left and this person was in charge.
Yeah.
And then you had it where this was going to happen and then that person left and this person was in charge and now it was taken away from you. So timing is everything.
It is.
I speak of that for myself also, and I'm going to tie it back to Tucson because my sister is a graduate of the University of Arizona.
Woohoo, bear down.
Bear down. I almost went there. I got into Arizona out of school. My parents didn't trust me to go away. They wanted me to go to some training seminar, and I said no. So they said, then you have to go to a community school. So I went to community college for a year. A year later, I got into UF with my brother and decided to go there instead of Arizona. There's always a soft spot in my heart for the University of Arizona. But my sister graduated from there and moved, instead of moving back to New Jersey, she moved to Scottsdale. And she struggled. I mean, she was working full time and making like $18,000 or, whatever it was. And a big theme for you is the struggle with money. And I'm reading this and I'm like, well, come on, you wrote for ESPN, you did this, you were a cyclist, you did that, you won this. And it's like, how in the world was money such an issue?
I think that's such a great question. And there are so many ways to look at this, but it's so true. And I'll point out a funny part of this. There are these website trackers now where you can go and plug in what you're worth is. And I've done that a few times and it shows up that, oh, my worth is $5 million. Because they look at what I've done in the past and they're like, look how marketable this is, $5 million. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Now I just have to find someone to be like, yeah, here's a check. But the reality is, though, that in this modern day and age, what's happening, especially with the growth of social media, is that people, whether it's publishing companies, whether it's ESPN, whether it's TV shows, they want to invest in similar things. Almost like in real estate, we have comps between houses. So these companies are looking at like, okay, well, is this person like that person? And maybe if we do this person will be like that person. And they're looking for kind of copycats of what's out there and what's marketable. So what's unfortunate is that this is the slow death of originality. And it's the, good writer, I'm seeing comments come in as I'm talking, and it's true. Good writers don't get paid enough, right? It's so true, because what's happening with originality is that's being like thrown out. People/companies like publishing, they're not willing to take a chance on originality like they were in the past. And
I think that's going to be hurtful for them, because you're looking for the influencer, and I rail against influencers all the time. There's going to become a point in time where you're not going to pay, this person $1 million for them to tweet out your thing, because it doesn't make any sense.
Right. And
someone like you who writes an article, even a book, I think is going to be more valuable, I hope. The problem is, by the time it took me to read this book, an influencer could have done so much content that they think is better for them. And, there's followers, but are you talking to the right people, even though you have all these people following you? But I mean, was there ever any point that you tried to get a job? Because there were jobs that you were doing that weren't paying much. I didn't hear much about, hey, I'm just going to try and get a job that pays me enough that I don't have to worry about it. Was it because that was not going to afford you the ability to write, ride, and be an activist?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are a couple things, and I'll try to answer that in one full swoop here. But because of the gender pay gap differential at world tour level of pro cycling, a lot of women had to carry one, if not two, part-time jobs just to achieve a livable wage, right? So in the 5 years that I raced professionally, only one of those years was I paid above the poverty line. That year, I think I made $25,000, and I thought I was the richest person in the world, and I still had to work on top of that, but that's how backward things were in the sport. Things have changed a bit for the better now, but I also knew that after I retired from cycling, if I stepped into a traditional career, yes, I could earn a better wage and a better salary, but it also wouldn't afford me the ability to write and to be an activist. And I think in this modern day and age, people think that that writing is something that happens quickly or happens fast, because we can share a post or we can share a tweet and do that really fast. So it must be the same with writing a book. I just sit down and write one draft and it's done in a week. No. Stand took me 3 years to write because I didn't have a formal book contract, and I had other part-time jobs where I had to work writing the book around those jobs. So you're absolutely right. Yeah, I could be living a very different life right now, and I could find a career where maybe I am valued for what I've done in the past and I'm earning a living, but I would not also be able to write and poke the bear of progress. So I've chosen this path, and I've turned left, so to speak. That comes up in the book.
That comes up in the book. Let's talk about half the road, because you're a filmmaker. That makes you a filmmaker, an award-winning filmmaker.
Worth $5 million, yes.
Worth $5 million, but you I mean, that's something. A documentary. You had a lot of help, which I talk often about. We can't do this without help. I ask for help all the time. I give help when I can. A ton of help for people. But talk about the process of making a film and the feeling about the success of it, where you're selling out screenings and you're being able to talk in front of audiences, and the people who come up to you. I mean, that might be your most recognizable thing, right?
Thank you. It certainly gives me a lot of pride and joy if it's, and it is still being recognized today. So that makes me happy. So this part is in the book, but I really like giving away a little bit and talking about it now because it's fun. So when I was working for ESPN, this is back when the years, let me give you the years here. This would have been the second go round with ESPN. So 2011 through 2012, 2 full years there. And I was senior editor, and I felt like, okay, I'm a decision maker. I can make some things happen here. And if you remember back then, ESPN's 30 for 30 series, their documentaries were really thriving. And of course, the majority of these documentaries were all men's sports. I believe we had a Venus and Serena film in there, and kudos to them. They're amazing athletes. But we were just really short on the women's side. And I know how many great stories there are on that side of the sports world. So I went to my boss and I said, hey, listen, now that I am a professional cyclist, I have access to some incredible stories, some incredible women. We need to make a documentary about this. There's so much going on behind the scenes. There's the inequity side, but also there's this amazing joy and love and passion of the sport, and people haven't seen it yet. And my boss, my higher up, said, I'll never forget it, and this is a woman, by the way, and she says, oh, well, cover your ears, Kathryn, but does anyone even watch women's cycling?
Yeah.
And to me, I was like, no, they don't watch women's cycling because there's no way to see it. And you're ESPN. You can make that happen, right? So you got to put this out there, and you have to have some faith in me that if I know there are great stories, and by this point, I'm a pretty seasoned journalist and writer, so you got to trust me that I'm going to find the good stories to tell. So there is this switch that flipped that day. And it made me think, you know what, if you're not going to make a documentary film, ESPN, then I'm going to do it. And then I said that out loud, and it was really scary because now I'm accountable. And this was 2012, right? And I left ESPN at the end of that year. Longer story in the book, but I decided I would go and make this film, Half the Road. And the title is a play on the fact that, women hold up half the sky, right? Well, women hold up half the road too. And of course, here I am saying, okay, I'm going to make a film. I've never made a film. I know how to write, so I can write the narrative script, but I'm certainly no cinematographer. So I know at this point I have to reach out and find a partner in the filmmaking side, and I did. Kevin Tokstad, he did an amazing job with the filming and the editing. But where the magic happened was the concept of crowdsourcing. And now we're pretty familiar with Indiegogo and Kickstarter and GoFundMe, where people can raise money to supplement their projects. But in 2012, this was still a relatively new idea. And a friend, two local Tucsonan friends, one whom happened to be my neighbor at the time, was like, hey, Kathryn, let's talk about crowdsourcing. I'd like to just help you understand this. And I was like, crowd-whatting? Surfing who? What? And once the concept was explained to me that we could raise funds globally for something that we believed in, I was like, oh my God, what a game changer. And I knew at that point too, that cycling, especially, the Tour de France, there is such a fanhood of cyclists out there. So, we prepared the proper campaign. Fast forwarding, at the end of the day, many months later, we successfully crowdsourced the entire budget for the film. So 2 different campaigns that resulted in roughly $77,000, which to me felt like $77 million, right? Yeah. It's like, oh my God, I've never seen this. We can make this happen. And every penny went right into making the film. That's considered a very bare bones budget for a film. But to me, I was like, this is amazing. I can even afford Waffle House today. This is awesome. So we made it happen. And of course, making it happen, that was a 2-year journey, a 2-year project. But here are the cool stats. This film was funded by 678 donors from 16 different countries. And my favorite stat of all, those who pledged were half women, half men. So our crowdsourcing showed that both equal parts men and women want to watch a film on pro cycling. And I already knew that in my heart and soul because I watched the fan base of pro cycling and I knew they were equal split.
It's good to be validated. Like we talk about it all the time, being valid for, because it doesn't necessarily matter what you believe.
Right.
And sometimes perception, reality, it's a gray area for there. I struggle with licensing and all that. I mean, that thing that for the 30 seconds, you had, what was it, $12,000 someone wanted for you to add? I don't even remember what it was.
Oh,
it was
I remember.
Crazy like that. It was to add some like 30-second video. Maybe it was Marion.
it was the Olympics. To add Olympic coverage into a documentary film. Of course, all of that coverage was owned by USOC, the Olympic Committee, right? And to add, we ended up using 1 full minute of Olympic coverage, kind of spliced in different parts, which we had to, because we were interviewing Olympic champions and world champions. So of course we want to show them doing their thing. And the overall price tag for that was, at first it was $12,000, and then it was something like $16,000 in the end, because I had forgotten rights to the DVD, right? And just to think that that's where all of the money was definitely going to USOC. Was it going to those athletes? I doubt it.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about even just material, but it could be a movie, a show, is sometimes it's just the vehicle, right? So you put together this great film, and it was successful, and maybe it wouldn't have been, but the thought that if this was a 30 for 30, it would have been 10 times possibly more successful, right?
Yeah.
Cobra Kai is on YouTube TV and nobody cares. It goes on Netflix. It's the #1 show of everything. So, and it's not the content, it's the vehicle. So, ESPN, I'm sure they're going to be fine, but you think that's why they could have helped more than they did, and probably should have. You talk about being grateful for them, as you should be, but there's also a lot of, I don't know what the word for it is, but feeling like, hey, they didn't hold up their end of the bargain for change, and they're a big believer in change and all of that stuff. Which is surprising to me.
I like to think that, there might be a point where they approach me for having Half the Road run on ESPN Classics or something, because now the film is 9 years old. It came out in 2014, but I started making it in 2012, so we're almost to the 10-year anniversary of its conception. But I will say this, Half the Road is out there now. It's on iTunes, Amazon Prime, and then my favorite link is Vimeo, because Vimeo is available worldwide. Yeah. And it's still out there. So what I love is that, we got picked up by a distribution company. We were in something like 18 different film festivals, and we won 3. And we won Audience Choice Award, which is huge, because these were not cycling film festivals. These were like real film festivals, and that's how we tried to make the film, that it's really about life. It's about progress. It's about a lot more than cycling. So I love that it's still out there. And to this day, this is where ESPN really missed out. I still get royalty checks. They are small, but I still get them because it's being seen. To this day, Half the Road is being downloaded and purchased because the subject and the content still matters. And if ESPN had stood by me and chosen to take a chance on something of that original content, they would be making big bucks. We both would.
And they have so much crap. They have great coverage, but they have so much crap that goes on. It's 24 hours a day. They replay the same thing over and over again. With the DVR, it really doesn't make sense to keep playing things over and over again. If I want to watch it, I'm going to record it. So, I hope they do play it someday.
I do too.
But we'll
call me, ESPN. We can talk about classics. I'm ready.
Let's talk a little bit about the personal side of this. We won't get into anything too detailed again because it's in the book. But mental health is a huge issue for me. I went through my own thing, and I always say it was very mild compared to other people's story, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't paralyzing for me. And I had this conversation. It was not long, right? And I never thought for a second that I wasn't going to be okay. And you have a different story. So without giving up all the information, what happened and how'd you get past it?
Yeah, a good question. And I always, my life's an open book, zing, literally. So I won't go into the long story because that is what we have in stand, and that would take like an hour for me to articulate. But I will jump to the heart of it, which is that for me, what really affected my mental health was that for a very particular time, which was really, it was 2014. So here's what was happening. We won our petition for the Tour de France, and women were going to be included finally in 2014. I also was able to stand on that start line of my dream. That was happening. Half the road was out. It was spanning the world. It was making a difference. Things were happening. My third book was coming out. Everything that I had worked and struggled for so long was all coming to fruition that year. And I finally felt like, okay, I'm here, I've arrived, right? And it was in that year, very unexpectedly, just out of the blue, my marriage ended. I didn't see it coming, and my husband left, and it was devastating on so many ways. I mean, anyone who's been through a divorce understands how devastating that can be, or just a breakup, you know, it's awful. And it was also something where I really needed a support system. Some people think like, oh, everything's going well, you've got it made, you're fine. But it's the opposite. It's like when everything finally clicks, that's when you need support the most. You need to be able to share that and celebrate it and be, you know, be in this with somebody. And that was kind of ripped away. And that's when the question in my head started circulating, like, was it worth it? Was all of this struggle and triumph, was it worth it? What did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? You know, and I couldn't shake that. And it really, really brought me to a very, very dark and terrible place. And, you know, as you know, and you'll see in the book, just how dark and terrible that got, it to the point where I didn't want to be here anymore. And the steps that I took toward making that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but the relationship part of it was really, it was shocking, although, and then it was like, it was like you couldn't explain why. Me reading this is like, what the hell happened? But then the other side of me is like, he wasn't who you thought he was.
Right.
And he didn't deserve you. But this is all the things you think of as a person in a relationship. Like, they weren't who I thought they were. You know, that's not behavior of anyone with any type of human decency. So you start thinking about these things. But on the flip side, I'm like, you know, just get over it. Right. I mean, that's literally, I think about that because I was in there, same thing. Like, man, just get over it. She wasn't the right one for you. She didn't do this. She didn't. So it's, you know, it's hard to understand that, but obviously until you're in that, and then there's so many other things going on at once that it's not just that, it's that combined with this, combined with that. And we're speaking vague, but the crazy thing is there's like 10 different things who could have derailed your whole mission.
Yeah.
Some could have been your choice. Some was just life going on. Some was bad fortune, bad luck, whatever you want to call it. And you survived it all. You're here today. Homestretch is doing great. There's a Tour de France, and yet we're way behind the times and where we need to be, right? I mean, all of that is true. This
is true. Yeah, we're still behind the times, so there's still a lot to fight for and to make stuff happen. And, you know, I'm okay now. It's been, 7 years since that heart of the struggle and why that was just so challenging. So I've healed in those 7 years. But just like you said, when that kind of self-destruction is happening, you don't realize like how deep you're in something. Yeah, that's where mental health is so important, because we can have the most capable, articulate, intelligent people who we think, oh yeah, they'll get themselves out of this. They're smart. They'll figure it out. But that's not how it works when you're in the throes of such enormous change and unexpectedness, Yeah. So, yeah.
Because mental health, it's a problem everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
How big a problem is it in cycling as opposed to maybe other sports or other stuff like, music?
Great question. Great question. No, I love that. I'm going to say it's actually very, very big in cycling, and here's why. I think there are other sports that have given a nod to how important mental health is. and to how extremely, they'll even put it out there publicly and in social media. And those sports that do that, I just give them such kudos, like congrats that you're talking about this. That's not happening in cycling. And when we really trace it back, cycling is one of the most, it's one of the oldest sports in the world. It's been around for a long, long time, and it's got these very antiquated beliefs. So there's, the Cycling Federation, which is called the UCI. Like soccer has FIFA, we have NBA, et cetera. In cycling, it's UCI. And they have not taken a stand on mental health. They have not talked about the fact that their athletes, they've not given them a safe platform for this. And also, I talk about this a little in the book. I being an endurance athlete, so I readily admit that in a sport like endurance athlete, it takes a lot of fortitude, both physically and mentally. And I think there are a lot of people who struggle with mental health issues in this sport, and they feel that they can just kind of keep going, keep chasing, keep doing in a long-term event, so to speak. I know I was one of them too. Like if my demons bubbled up, I was like, whew, well, I'm going to go out for a 5-hour bike ride and soothe these beasts, Yeah. I mean, I can articulate that now, and I see it in my fellow friends, competitors, teammates. And I think that that's something which really needs to be addressed in every individual sport. Has to step up to the plate of ownership and say, we're going to provide a safe place where these athletes can grow, can foster, can nourish what needs to be done with their mental health. So I'd like to think that the future is bright, but it still needs a lot of work in not just in cycling, but other endurance sports as well.
Yeah, there's the cycling was in the news. Even when I was looking it up, they're still not sure what to do with the women's race, right?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot going on. And there's
Are you involved? Are you and the crew involved in this at all? Or you kind of stepped back and said, look, we brought it here. It's up to you guys to kind of take it from here.
Well, the good news is the announcement has been made that in 2022, we will see a women's Tour de France of more than one day. It's actually going to grow now into an 8 to 10 day race, which is wonderful. It's awesome. But then there's me still poking the bear saying, I'm so glad we have 8 to 10 days coming. Where are the next 2 weeks? And for those who don't know, the men's Tour de France is a 3-week event, right? And the reason that women have not been given that platform, although they were in the 80s for 5 years, and that was wonderful. It was then discontinued by the management, but the women were and are still able to do the same distance as a man. We all believe that women's races are a little bit more exciting because the UCI currently has the women capped at like 3.5, 4 hour event. And that's actually more exciting to watch than a 6-hour event because I
was going to say 8 to 10 is like, all right, there might be more excitement in that event than there is, in this longer event that might, you might be halfway through and it's over.
Exactly. There's a lot more, in cycling lingo, there's a lot more attacking and surging and dynamics. Whereas sometimes in a 6-hour men's race, they're just kind of just cruising along, not doing anything until maybe the last 2 hours, right? So one of our fun arguments is like, oh, okay, well, if you don't think that women can race 6 hours, that's fine. Don't give us a 6-hour race, but make everyone's race 3 hours, men and women. And it'll be a lot more exciting.
Might make this go better. One of the things that was going on that was in your favor was the whole Lance Armstrong and the doping problem that they had, which was kind of like, all right, well, maybe we'll do something else to take the attention away from that. How big of a role was that in you being able to make something happen? Because if cycling was thriving in the ways that it was for about a decade, and with Lance and all the other champions, and there was no question about people cheating, maybe they don't give you that shot. I don't know.
Well, that's when the activism really started kicking in. Forgive me if I'm blanking on the year, but I think Armstrong's confession and outing was 2011. I believe in the winter of 2011. Forgive me if I'm wrong by a year, but I think it was, right? So, and that's when I had started pushing for change. And what could have been amazing and wonderful is like, okay, there's kind of a dark cloud over the men's side of cycling. What a great time to invest in the women And as we say, a rising tide lifts all boats. So if they were to cast the light on the women back then and really build a package around this in the media and in exposure, I can tell you that right now, 10 years later, we would be so much farther advanced in both men's and women's cycling. But instead, they didn't do that. I think there was this dark cloud cast upon all of cycling, and it didn't have to be that way. And, to this day, when we talk about cycling, people will say, oh, Lance Armstrong, as if he's the only one that's associated with the sport. And, for the entire decade, I could have pointed out how many amazing athletes and people there are in this sport so that we didn't have that one, one person at that.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge, is even as how good as someone is, it's a lesser known sport, and I'm guilty of it. I don't know a whole lot about cycling. But it's that's part of the challenge with it. So getting the visibility and the stars and having the names, part of that is the job of the sport to elevate the people who are, and part of it is in the U.S. it's not as good, when the U.S. isn't winning, right? It's more of a European sport if the U.S. teams aren't doing so great, and that's the same with any sport. You see it in soccer also, although soccer had a great win last night for the USA, and the Olympic baseball team qualified. So a lot of good stuff here.
Oh, yeah.
We got a question from Brent. Softball or gymnastics on television is to wonder why it feels maybe popular compelling between genders. He loves basketball and tennis. He watches men's basketball and women's tennis. It's interesting. I prefer watching men in some sports and prefer watching women in other sports. Volleyball is one of them. Watching women, maybe tennis too. I don't know. I think just having the ability to do it. I don't know. Watching a woman race a cycle is really the same than watching a man. It is
at the highest level. It's the same. It's exactly the same because consider our sport too is that we're wearing helmets and sunglasses. It's pretty hard to differentiate between a man and a woman at a high speed pace where both are pretty darn equally matched in terms of their physical ability, right? And so, there's that. And we also have to think of, I do feel very, very powerfully that I think that the gender equation goes both ways in terms of the visibility of a sport. I would love to see men have more of a platform in sports that are dominated by female side, like gymnastics is a perfect example. We always pay attention to the women in gymnastics, but the men are just as powerful and amazing as athletes as the women.
I couldn't name you one male gymnast in the last decade. I don't know.
Oh, there were, it's such a great question that you ask. There were brothers in there, Ham brothers, I believe.
I'm just saying they don't. Yeah, I think that does sound familiar.
Yeah.
Women, and I don't think that the women should always make exactly what the men make. I just think they should make more. Like, it's a hard argument, but I don't. We talk about WNBA versus NBA. Some of it has to do with the revenue generated. There's just more to give. If we pay the women athletes all this, then the sport doesn't exist. Right? If the best player is making $30 million and all that, I don't know if it exists, but I do know that they should be making more. And so sometimes it's just, okay, let's elevate and make more. It doesn't have to start being equal, but hey, let's have them have a salary, right? Let's have them get a salary, which they don't have. And then we can work to moving that up.
And moving that up, though, comes from the exposure, right? So when was the last time you saw a WNBA game played at 7:30 prime time on a weeknight? No, it's usually it's still that women's sports are considered the opening band to the men's sports. I can think back to college NCAA, the Final Four, and the final game. The women's game was held like on a Sunday at 3 p.m. and the men's game was held the next night at 7 p.m.
I'd rather watch it on Sunday at 3 though. But stay up late on Monday. I'm on the East Coast. I'm not at the West.
I hear you, and I get that. But but when we really peel back the layers and look at that, it's like are women given the same equal primetime broadcasts that the men are, and it's usually that they're not. So we have to go to those who are in the decision-making positions of power. And why not have that on Monday, Tuesday night, same time, exact same place? And sometimes it should be that we put the men first and then the women, not always the opening band to the main band, but switch that around and put the women as the main band, right?
Yeah, I mean, as Brent's saying, there's more interest, I think, in the men's Final Four than the women's Final Four, but that doesn't mean that
that's because it's been generated that way.
I think that's part of it. You can argue about the money that they raise and the interest overall. Part of it is because it's ingrained in our society, and that's what we've been shown. Right. But I also do think that there's stats to show. That doesn't mean that they can't both be shown at a prime spot. We don't have to compare one to the other. That's the thing I think that gets lost in all of this when we don't have to compare this to that. We could just say, all right, this could stand on its own and it could do its own thing. And that's really what part of the equality is. Not saying, hey, we need to have everything you have, but we need to get rid of the things that are taking us away from being as successful as you are. And
right.
It's not going to go right. They can put the women's tournament on Monday at 7. It's not going to generate right from day one. But if they constantly are doing it, they
not from day one.
Yeah. And look, ESPN's doing a great job. They got women's college softball, the College World Series, and the first 5 minutes of SportsCenter was showing the highlights of that. Now, some of it was there was a huge upset and there was a perfect game. So part of it is always going to be performance. But it's right. There's a lot of this is a whole nother conversation. I want to talk about Homestretch also. Okay. The last thing I want to ask about activism is what's the worst, the most egregious thing right now that we should fight for?
Oh gosh, are we
in
talking
your
about
opinion in the world?
It really does come down to just equal inclusion of having a platform available where men and women have access to that same level or that same platform of whatever area that they're going for, So I'm keeping that answer geared toward the conversation that we've been in, because there are so many problems in the world when it comes to like violence and race. I mean, that's a huge can of worms to open in terms of what problems still exist out there.
Do you join activism for that? I mean, how do you pick and choose? And obviously some of it is belief, some of it's time.
I think that the biggest thing is to let your gut really navigate toward what feels most personal and egregious to you. For me, the whole reason that I went on this activism trail or this path toward women's equality in cycling was because I was a cyclist, because I saw it, I lived it, I breathed it firsthand, right? But again, that's just a corner of the world that if we can fix it, it makes the whole world better. So if anyone is out there thinking like, where can I make change? What can I do? Really pay attention, look around at society, and if something says, that just doesn't feel right to me, explore that and be like, where can I, what part can I do to make this better? Because you really need to be passionate about the change that you're striving to create. Otherwise, it's going to get tiresome, burdensome, and just not fun in any way. So this is where I think it's so important to pick what's close home to you in some regard. And it takes a lot of time to do that. But
years and years. We talked to my friend Glenn. He says impeach Kevin Crane. Did you see the movie Dream Killer?
No, not yet. Not yet.
You should watch it.
I'm writing it down.
A great story about people who are incarcerated falsely.
Oh, yeah.
Had 10 years. I mean, they had a prosecutor who's now a judge who, I mean, the guy should be in jail himself. That's a huge thing. And there's a lot of movies that have been out, like the Michael B. Jordan movie.
Yeah.
I forget the name.
Oh, yeah. The book was amazing. Gosh, I
watched the movies instead of read the books, but
yeah.
What was it called? I don't know. Well, it'll come to me once we get off this, but that's something that for activism that is deeply needed. The people who are just in prison for no reason. They need to
Oh, I totally agree.
It's crazy. Obviously, it's skewed a lot towards people of color, which is a big thing. And, you know, the whole thing with marijuana. And I am not an advocate for or against marijuana. I've never smoked it in my life, but people who are in jail for such small things of that is crazy. Let's talk about Homestretch. I barely even got to half the stuff I wanted to talk about, but let's talk about Homestretch, because that was your real passion, and that's what you made happen. It was something that was kind of already going on, but you kind of made it a bigger thing.
Yeah. So the short story is that when I was racing, I mentioned that year where my highest salary is $25K, right? And it was the year before that where I was on a world tour team. I was working 2 jobs. I was struggling to make ends meet. And then with my marriage falling apart too, I was like, well, shit, I finally got to the pinnacle of my sport, but I'm going to have to quit because I can't earn a living from it. And I'm carrying 2 jobs and it's exhausting. I'm just gonna have to quit. But wouldn't it be amazing if we could change the rules at UCI so that women are actually granted a livable base wage, a base salary? The men had a base salary, but the women didn't at the world tour level. I'm like, that's not okay. There needs to be a minimum base salary. I don't care how many millions people are going to make on top of that contract, but everybody should at least have the equal playing field of a livable base wage. And it wasn't there. And I was like, what if we could fight for that? But behind the scenes, what if there were an establishment where women who are at the pro world tour level could come and live and train for free as they focus on fulfilling their cycling obligations with their team? And I was like, that would be amazing. If something like that existed, I'd be okay. And as long as we fight behind the scenes to make change happen. So
it's a nonprofit.
It's a nonprofit. So out here in Tucson, Arizona, which is really a hotbed for cycling, for training at the pro level because of the weather, the topography, the proximity to races. It's amazing. So we opened Homestretch. My business partner and I opened Homestretch in Tucson, Arizona, and we've been running for 5 seasons. We have helped 70 athletes from 17 different countries. And we have an amazing alumni network of really affecting change. But here's the best part. In 2020, we finally won our push for change. There is now a base salary at the world tour level for women's pro teams. Of course, the UCI being the UCI, they're like, oh, we're too scared to change it in 1 year. It's going to take 3 years for us to build it step by step up to full equity. So the good news is for the past 2 years, we've had a base salary. And next year, at the end of 2022, it will be equal to the men's pro Conti level. So it's happening.
That's a huge get. A huge get.
It's a huge win. It's a huge win. And I'm very hopeful that the Homestretch will be acquired by an entity that can then focus on more grassroots or middle roots programs. So, so far so good. We're doing all right.
Yeah. One of the things that I didn't get to talk about, which I meant to, is this whole thing, your whole story, everything that happened, almost all of it, came from the fact that ESPN sent you to do a piece of trying to make the Olympic team as a cyclist when you weren't a cyclist. So real quick.
Yep.
Did they want you to fail and that would be the story?
I'm glad that you brought this up for 2 reasons. Because today, actually, we are releasing the paperback edition of As Good as Gold. Hold on. So here's the book. You can see across the top, it has not for resale. That's not actually there on the real book. But As Good as Gold first came out in 2010. It was after my 2006 to 2008 journey where ESPN hired me to find out what does it actually take to get to the Olympic Games. And it was in this premise of a kind of set up to fail. Like, how far can she go? She's not going to make it. What's it going to be like? It's actually, that is the journey that got me into cycling. And long story short, while I didn't qualify for the 2008 games, what was crazy was that I came remarkably close to qualifying and the love of cycling was born. And I was like, okay, this journalism assignment might be over, but I'm going to still keep going. And that's also when I was alerted to the inequity and what's really happening in this sport and where we needed to make change. So ESPN put this book out in 2010. And I just regained the rights to this book. As it happens in publishing, usually you sell your rights and your life away, for anywhere from 10 to 20 years. So this is really exciting. My first book, All the Sundays Yet to Come and As Good as Gold, are now officially mine. And we were able to release them as paperbacks, and they came out today. They're on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, where you find books. But for me, it's a big win because now it's like, I'm standing on my own 2 feet.
Yeah, which is great. What's the future? We don't, your personal life is your personal life. You went through a lot of personal relationship struggle. Is there room in your life for romance, or have you shut that out completely?
Oh, well, that's a great question. And I actually talk about how in the book I don't put my personal life on social media anymore because it was just so devastating during the years of the divorce.
Yeah, completely understand.
I'm in a good place. I'm in a happy place, and I'll leave it there, and again, I'm 7 years down the road from the divorce, and I've met some incredible people along the way on that journey. And I like where I am now in terms of relationship status, and with who I surround myself with in my life has changed for the better. It's just great. So that's my kind of covert way of saying.
No, that's all right. Good. What's the future of Homestretch and the future of you as an activist?
Yeah. So future of Homestretch, we're still continuing next year, and then I'll make a decision as to what we do since we have achieved the base salary by 2023. I'll see what direction we go from there. But my greatest hope is that someone else comes in and runs Homestretch and takes it over for the grassroots level, because I feel like I've done my job. I've checked all the boxes, but for now we're still going strong. It's awesome. And then for activism, I will always continue to kind of fight against anything that blocks the path of equality, specifically for women, but also for anything that comes up. If somebody's not getting a fair shake, we gotta shake the tree until it happens. So I'll keep fighting there. And there will be more books in the future. I'm just still in the year of push and stand out to the crowd, right? That's here too. That one. So that's everything we've talked about today is in stand, and that's what's keeping me really busy this year, because that's kind of how you have to do it when a book first comes out. It's a busy year.
If they do a movie on your life, who would you like to play you?
Oh, I thought that Margot Robbie did an amazing job in the film I, Tonya.
Yeah.
Right, she kicked ass. She's done incredible film production stuff that have strong female protagonists. I think she's smart and she's savvy. She doesn't look anything like me. She's beautiful, but I'm sure they can put some makeup on her to, resemble something in this arena. But
that would be a good choice. Who are your 4 favorite athletes, non-cyclists?
Oh, you want me to come up with that off the top of my head? That's a really, really tough question. So
your favorite, you admire him the most. It could be for any reason.
Well, right now, I totally admire how Naomi Osaka is standing up for her rights, and Michelle Wie West now.
Yeah.
They're standing up for rights in sport. I think that's amazing. Kathryn Switzer, back in the day, to run the Boston Marathon officially. She's a huge inspiration to me. Of course, Billie Jean King. She's amazing. But there are so many incredible athletes who are out there. Those are 4 just off the top of my head, but I have to say that Megan Rapinoe and Abby Wambach are huge for what they've done for women's soccer. I know that I'm giving a lot of kind of obvious ones to the general public in sports, but another one, Dotsie Bausch, who is a track cyclist, silver medalist in the Olympics. She overcame a really tough path to get where she was in that sport. And she also champions, animal rights and compassion, switch for good. What I love about that is that she's used her voice There's something, she's vegan. I eat everything. We have many differences in that regard, but I love that she's used her platform to fight for what she believes in. And any athlete who does that just has my utmost respect and acknowledgement of how great they are.
You know, it's controversial with Colin Kaepernick, and I think whether you agree with him or not, that, and I posted before, like, stand for something, even if it means losing everything. And you know, he did. There's other people who are doing the exact same thing that he did, and they're doing fine, and he's going to be fine. So we don't need to. I'm not going to feel badly for him in the sense of his life accomplishments, because he's lived a better life than most people ever dream of. And the funny thing is, think about where you've been in your life, and with someone who had no money, and so it is possible. Keep dreaming and keep going after what you want. We'll let you out of here in the same way we let everyone go. You pick one person that you could spend a day with that you've never met and you're not related to. Who are you picking, and what are you guys doing? It doesn't have to be in the cycling world. It doesn't have to be in the sports world. It could be anyone in the world. And,
that's such a hard. You need to.
We're trying to. No, I like doing it without. I don't like giving people the questions I'm going to do, but we've had some great answers, and I've actually done some outreach to try and start making it happen for people. Some have made more reasonable requests, but I want you to don't worry about how hard it would be to happen. Whoever you would most want to spend time with in the world. We've had Barack Obama, Donald Trump,
Oprah
Winfrey, Elon Musk. They're all on the list for me to try and make happen.
All right. Okay, I own this challenge. You know what? And if it's my answer and I can answer however I want, then I will take that day and I will cut it in half. And I will spend the first half with Kamala Harris, because what she's done is amazing. And I would love to talk to her for hours. And on the second half of the day, let's take it back to Colin Kaepernick. I would like to talk to him too. He comes up in Stand. I write about him, I fought for what I believed in, and I got Kaepernicked in a few ways, not to the extent that he did. And I want to really pick his brain. I also want to ask him, how are you doing mentally? Like, we know you're going to be okay financially and you'll be remembered. How's your mental health? Are you okay? Do you want to, sit on the beach and talk about it? So there you go. That's my answer for today.
Two great picks. I'd love to be around either one of them. I'd like to to challenge them on some of the things too, because even some of my favorite people, they don't do everything right, and no one's perfect. We don't all do everything right, but we have to be able to own our mistakes and be able to be open to other ideas. I'll always speak for what's important to me. I'm lucky enough to be able to do so. I don't worry about what the consequences are for my business. Because I believe that everything I'm talking about is just common sense, human decency. I don't think there's an argument for the other side. And so if there is another argument and that side doesn't want to do business with me, I'm okay. There's enough people in this world who I think are good, and I'll be fine. So I appreciate you being here. I appreciate everything you've done. It's inspired me. I hope it inspires other. I already was in that direction, but it gives a nice little push, and hopefully more. I'm happy to help your causes any way I can. If there's anything you can do to help and collaborate with to push things moving forward, I'm happy to do it. And I look forward to crossing paths at some point somewhere.
Thank you, Matt, for today and for all that you're doing to put more voices out there, and to your watchers, listeners, however you're involved in today's show. Thank you for being part of it. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, have a great week and keep doing what you're doing. We'll see you guys tomorrow. We got a great week on the Wolff Den. See everyone tomorrow.